And I want to thank you all very much for coming. I'm looking forward to sharing my years of admissions consulting experience with you. Before we begin, I wanted to point out a few items that will help you maximize your time here and one that will help us improve these sessions. We're going to use the question window for your questions, and you can post them at any point in time during the webinar in the question window. I've left time for a Q&A at the end. So, please feel free to post your questions whenever they occur to you. Again, we'll address them at the end. I also will be asking you questions, and I'd like you to use the chat window for your answers to my open-ended questions. Reminder for those who just came in, if you've not yet downloaded your worksheet, please take a second to do so and print it out. It is linked to in the chat window, and it's going to help you get the most of today's presentation. You'll find there pages 1 through 3 are just for taking notes. The last page, though, is a table where you can put down ideas for yourself on an individual basis, what you believe caused your rejection, and action items that you can take to fix those things and make sure that they are no longer a factor, or at least a much less of a factor when you reapply. When you leave, you're going to receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback. And the best item or announcement is this one. You can save $75 on acceptance rejection review if you purchase by February 22nd. Today is February 15th, so you have a few days to get in there and buy. The coupon code is 2XCharm. The URL is accepted.com/change-med-reject. I'll get a little bit more into what's exactly provided in the med rejection review package, but you would have one of our consultants, highly experienced, very, very knowledgeable, review your one primary application and up to 2 secondaries and give you suggestions as to what went wrong and how to fix it. Now, I'd like to learn a little bit about you. Can you please raise your hand if you want to go to medical school to pursue your dream career, becoming a physician? Okay, well, most of you are here for the right reasons. Very good. That's what I thought, and that's what this process is really about. So while the focus of today's webinar is on the how of getting into medical school as a reapplicant, the purpose of the entire exercise and process of medical school application is your being able to pursue the career of your dreams. Now let's have a poll here. Again, I do like to learn a little bit about my audience. How many times have you all applied to medical school already? The options are 1, 2, or 3 or more. I'm going to assume that that should cover the universe of everybody in this webinar right now, right? How many times have you applied to medical school already? The options are 1, 2, 3 or more. Okay, well, let's end the poll and share the results. 100% of you have applied exactly 1 time. Okay, that's with 80% participating. Okay, actually it says 66% of you participated. All right, let's do the next poll. Hopefully we can get the percentage up a little bit. Why do you think you were rejected? And you can put more than one reason if you think is relevant. Low stats, lack of clinical and or research experience, poor essays, you bombed your interviews, or other. Again, you can put more than one factor if you feel you need to. So it could add up to more than 100%. The options again are low stats, lack of clinical and or research experience, poor essays, bombed your interview, or other. And with 83% of participants voting, we can close the poll. 60% of you attributed it to low stats, 40% to lack of clinical and or research experience, and bombed your interview is another 20%. Okay, great. Now, in your worksheet, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to mention again now, you will find on the last page a table. And what I'd like you to do is take those little Post-it notes, if you have them handy. If you don't, just use a pencil or pen. Pencil is what I would recommend. Write down what you think at this point caused your rejection. And you can write it down in the different factors in the different boxes. If it's Post-it notes, just stick them in the different boxes because you can move it around much more easily. One item per Post-it note. Put the Post-its in the second column as appropriate as we go through the webinar, because I'm going to give you a whole bunch of suggestions as to how you can change things for next time around. If you're not sure something contributed, you can write it down and just put a question mark by it. Okay. Most of your Post-it notes are going to end up in either the first or the second row, which is actually a good thing, because those are the portions of the admissions process that you have control over. You have some influence on, let's put it that way. And again, leave empty Post-it notes near you or that pen or pencil handy so that you can add mostly to column 2 as we go through the webinar. Okay, here we go. Now, I think the first thing you have to do is evaluate, do you still want to be a physician? If you don't, then you can really leave right now. This is all about how to get into medical school so you can become a physician. If you still want to be a physician, then pull up a chair, hold on to your hat, because there's a lot of material to cover. First, I want to talk to you a minute about the inevitable disappointment of being rejected. It's true, rejection is disappointing and painful. It shouldn't be devastating. It isn't tragic, and it certainly isn't irrevocable. I was interviewed last year by Thrive magazine about running a successful service business. And the last question for me in this interview was a curveball, something I'd never been asked before. If you could start a movement, what movement would you start? And I replied as follows. I would start an I Can Change movement. We have worked with and spoken to so many applicants who overcame all kinds of difficulties on their way to achieving incredible success. I'd like people to realize that whatever life has handed them, and everyone has challenges and difficulties, one can choose how to respond. You can respond with a kind of determination, commitment to growth, and self-awareness that will change the outcome of your next application. I invite you to muster the grit and join the I Can Change movement right now. Let's get to work on that goal. So there are 4 basic reasons for rejection. The first one is you weren't competitive at your target schools. Next, you didn't present your qualifications effectively. You had great qualifications, but you didn't present them well. The third is you were the victim of the numbers and intense competition that definitely exists when applying to medical school, especially this year and last. But it was really pretty intense even before COVID. Then there's a possibility of a combination of 1, 2, and 3. Now, we're going to dig into each of these 4 reasons later in the webinar. But right now, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the things you can do in response? Okay, in the chat window, please. What do you intend to do? What do you intend to change next time around? How do you intend to respond? In the chat window, please. Okay, if you felt you weren't competitive, and if I recall, 60% of you said that was one of the, stats were a factor. Somebody said they bombed their interview. Somebody else, I don't remember all the other stuff, but certainly the stats were a major thing. What are you going to do? What are you going to change? Assess weakness and try to improve them. Great, Christina. You might retake the MCAT, take more science classes. Very good. Anybody else want to participate? Share? Anyone? All right, I'm going to go on. Here we got something else. Maybe ask schools for feedback. If they give it, that's a great idea. Okay. There are 4 ways to change the outcome in very broad strokes, and we're going to go into it in more detail. Number 1, apply to programs where you are competitive, where your stats are competitive. Number 2, improve your qualifications. As Christina was saying, maybe retake the MCAT, take more science classes, earn A's. Number 3, improve the presentation of your qualifications. I think we gave this webinar last year or 2 years ago, or a very similar webinar. And somebody said, well, the activities I did them, that hasn't changed. Well, how did you present them? Did you focus on your impact? Did you focus on the change you affected? Or did you focus on the change on yourself? What did you learn? Those are all things that can be changed that would improve the presentation of your qualifications. And then, of course, a combination of the above. Now let's go through what if you determined you weren't competitive at the schools you applied to. Academics are usually the first place to look, as Christina mentioned, improve, retake the MCAT, take some more science classes, earn A's. But let's evaluate first. If the average at the school you are applying to, the GPA, is a 3.8, and your average was 0.2 or more below that, you might have a low GPA, especially if it's a low science GPA. There's also the possibility that your MCAT was low. If you're more than 3 points below the school's average, then you probably have a low MCAT. Now, it's better, frankly, that my 3 point below average and my 0.2 is a good rule of thumb, but I think you'd be better off using MSAR and its 25th to 75th percentile for admitted students. And also realize that when the MCAT is concerned, the individual section scores also make a difference. Now, if both your test score, your GPA rather, and your MCAT are low, then you are, for the schools that you were applying to, then you have a serious issue in terms of, are you competitive? And you probably want at least one or preferably both above average, unless you are from an underrepresented in medicine group. You must provide evidence that you can do the work to the schools. That's absolutely critical to them. They do not want to admit somebody and then have them drop out or flunk out because they just can't do the work. And what is your response to this situation? Well, one response would be to apply to programs where you are competitive based on your current stats. Either less competitive MD programs, depending upon where you were aiming at, or DO programs. I'm hesitant to recommend schools outside the United States because it can be difficult to get back into the United States. But there are schools that have very good reputations and where it's possible to do so. So just be very careful with that one. The other option, which is the one that Christina was pointing to, is to improve your qualifications so that you will be competitive. And one of the better ways to do that is to consider a post-bac program. If you do well, you'll be showing that you can handle the work of medical school. Many formal post-bac programs also provide MCAT support. They help you improve your study skills so that you're better prepared and better capable of performing in medical school. And some have linkages to different medical programs, medical schools. The other option, obviously, is to prepare and retake the MCAT. Now, I would strongly encourage, if you took the MCAT before and you got a score that you're not satisfied with, that you up the ante in terms of your prep. If it was all self-study before, then try taking a course, either online or offline. Of course, at this point, most things are offline. If you took a course before, consider working with a tutor. The MCAT is important and it is hard. There's just no two ways about it. So allow time for it, view it as a job or a class, and focus as you're doing it on what's most difficult. I was very impressed. A couple of months ago, I was helping my grandson with some flashcards that he was working on. And every time he got one wrong, we discussed it. I explained to him what he did wrong, and he put it aside. The things he got right, he just flipped over. And he went through the deck, and then he immediately reached for the cards he put aside. And he said, all right, let's do this again. And we went through those. If he still got them wrong, again, put them aside until he got them all right. And again, I provided explanation for what's right and why it's right and all that. But that's what you should be doing when you prep for the MCAT. It's so much more fun to do what comes easy. But what you have to work on is what's difficult. Now, what about other elements that medical schools are looking for? In the chat window, please, what are some other things besides stats that medical schools look at? What are some other things besides your MCAT and GPA that medical schools are looking for? Tanisha, clinical experience. That's right. Anything else? Clinical experience, commitment to volunteer work and your community. Excellent, Christina. Anything else that schools sometimes want? Not necessarily always, but sometimes. Anything else? How about research? Some schools do want sometimes expressing an interest in primary care. That depends on the school, but you're right. You're right, Christina. Some schools, those that are more research oriented, would like to see research in your background. Some might want to see leadership or teamwork experience. But let's go through this a little bit, okay? So all medical schools really want to see that people have clinical exposure. They want to know that you know what you're getting into. Again, no medical school wants to admit somebody just to have that person flunk out. So if you don't have it, get it. It's just that simple. If your clinical exposure is limited to shadowing, then seek a role where you are active, where you have some responsibility and are interacting with sick people, their families, and other clinicians. That could be a position as an EMT, a scribe, an emergency room volunteer, a clinic volunteer. Contact tracing is becoming less of a viable option, but certainly during the pandemic, it was something. It can also be working on a telephone helpline, especially if you have health reasons that where you don't want to be in a clinical setting during the pandemic. Now, obviously, when you're in medical school, you're going to have to be in clinical settings. And again, medical schools want to know that you know what you're getting into. So I would strongly encourage you to find some way to volunteer or work for pay in a clinical setting. Now, I mentioned research as a possibility. It is not required by many medical schools, if not most medical schools, but research-oriented programs will want to see it, and even less research-oriented programs will value it. It does teach critical thinking skills, not to mention just the basics of scientific research. Several of you mentioned community service, and that's 100% right. Participating in community service allows you to show that you care and are committed to service. And medicine, at its root, at its fundamentals, foundation, is about service and caring. Community service also allows you to reveal leadership and teamwork skills that are vital in medicine and that you may not be able to reveal in either a classroom setting or a job where you are relatively junior on the totem pole. It also allows you to show impact and allows you to grow. And there is increasing focus in medical school admissions on serving the underserved and disadvantaged. So make sure that you have either community or clinical service that includes service to these groups. Now, I said, getting back to our beginning, right? What are the three basic reasons for rejection? 1, you weren't competitive. 2, poor presentation of your qualifications. Let's deal with that right now. So you have to evaluate, first of all, how you presented yourself in your primary application. The primary application is very much about your fitness for a career as a physician. I can tell you many stories like this, but one call kind of sticks in my mind. A mom who called about our services said her son checks all the boxes. He has a high GPA. He has a great MCAT. He has a master's. He has clinical exposure, community service, but they aren't confident of his acceptance. Why? Not because he lacked research. She was justifiably concerned about his presentation and his essays, et cetera, his activity descriptions, et cetera. And they accepted to help her son with that aspect of the application. Presentation counts. Medical schools want multidimensional human beings of good character, committed to service and caring for others. So you have to ask yourself in terms of the primary application, do your personal statements and MMEs show your motivation for medicine? Do they provide insight into you as a human being? Are they showing you as a future leader who also works well on a team? Do the essays and activity descriptions complement each other and the rest of the primary application? Are your essays and MMEs well written, showing you as a professional with attention to detail who knows how to communicate? If you answered no to any of these questions, you have work to do, and poor presentation probably played a role in your rejection. The secondary also has presentation elements to it, but it's much more about showing fit with a specific school. So you have to ask yourself, were your secondary essays generic and not specific to a given school? Did you copy and paste because you were rushing? Did you fail to understand the differences and the nuances between the different schools? Did your secondary responses duplicate what's in the primary? Were they rushed and sloppy? If you answered yes to any of these, you need to change that the next time around. And then does your writing throughout your primary and secondary application show that you can communicate? Communication is critical in medicine, both listening and conveying your thoughts and information clearly. Your essays represent your communication skills. Now, it's extremely difficult to be objective about your own writing. Writing requires rewriting. It reveals your attention to detail and thoroughness. And as you can see, it can be a big red flag to an admissions director. So here you have Jennifer Welch, who's the Associate Dean of Admissions at SUNY Upstate. And if you look at the last sentence in her quote, if you make careless mistakes, such as errors in capitalization, etc., it's a red flag. Now, I could have gotten other quotes. This happens to be particularly clear in terms of making my point. You have to make sure that your writing is clear and professional. Not professional in the sense of being a professional writer, but in the sense that you intend to be a professional in the future, and your writing has to be on that kind of level. And the last thing I want to ask about your secondaries is, did you submit late? You want to try and submit within 2 weeks of receipt. Now then, what is effective presentation, which is what you want to aim for? Something that'll earn, 50 million downloads from a TED Talk. For the written portions of the primary application, keep in mind this goal. You want to portray yourself as a multidimensional human being committed to service and caring for others. That's what your audience values. Each element in the primary should contribute to that portrait of you. For the personal statements and the most meaningful experiences, I have a little acronym I want you to keep in your head. PAD. Okay, the P stands for provide a window into the real you. The A is add value to the rest of your application. And D is demonstrate writing and communications ability. That's the purpose of the personal statement and also the MMEs. Now, we constantly encourage our clients to use specifics and anecdotes to prove the claims they make. Specifics and anecdotes add interest to your essays, differentiate you positively from those who are writing in generalities, and that there are a lot of applicants writing in generalities. And again, they're going to provide that window to the real you. They're going to add to the rest of your application, and they are going to, if well written, demonstrate your writing and communications abilities. So balance those stories with analysis that relates why the incident is important and revealing. And why it's important will also relate to how you or someone else or some entity changed. And what did you learn from the experience? For the primary, it's why do you want to be a physician? That's the primary message you want to get across, and what qualities will make you a wonderful physician. For secondaries, it's how do the examples you provide answer the questions posed and show fit with the program's strength and mission. Now, just as I advised you with to up your game with MCAT prep, if you're retaking the MCAT, consider upping your game by working with an accepted consultant who can provide the expertise and experience and objectivity you lack and can certainly benefit from. Now, I also mentioned earlier, did you submit your primary early? By that, I mean June, and return secondaries promptly. That would be within 2 weeks of receipt. And one of you, I don't remember how many of you it was, but somebody mentioned that you bombed your interview. If you received 3 or more interview invitations and didn't get an acceptance anywhere, your interview skills are suspect. Now, in an interview, much like in secondaries, the focus is on fit during the interviews. Interviewers want to see you as a member of their community and someone they would want to have as a colleague. If you didn't show fit by being able to express why you want to attend that specific school, you could have blown your interview. If you got rattled and showed excessive nerves, a little nerves they know about, you could have blown your interview. If you come across as cocky or arrogant, you could have blown your interview. If they can't see you as someone they would want to have treating their family member, their loved one, you blew your interview. So you have to walk into that interview with a credible, coherent reason why any interviewing school is the right one for you. Now, you have on the screen our mock interview services. Again, there are not too many interview invitations going out now, but for next time around, make sure you practice interviewing to calm your nerves and to ace your interviews. And if you have a mock interview with an accepted consultant, you also will get feedback as to how to improve your interviewing skills, how to improve your answers, and again, ace your interview. Now, the last factor that contributes to rejection is being a victim of the numbers and the intense competition. It is possible to be qualified and to present yourself well, to be qualified for the target schools you're aiming for, to present yourself well, and yes, still get rejected. Competition is extraordinarily intense at medical school, and last year saw a dramatic increase in application volume, which seems to have moderated this year. Okay, that's the word I'm getting. If you honestly believe that you are competitive at your target schools and also presented your qualifications well, I still have some suggestions for you. Number one, don't do what you did last year. It didn't work, number one. And number two, even if you say, I did it perfectly, you will fail to show growth and maturation in this intervening year or 2 years or however long it was since you last applied. Schools will be impressed negatively by the lack of effort you are investing this time around. So another few suggestions. Do apply to an appropriate number of schools, including all in-state programs that you would consider attending. And as I've hinted at a couple of times, apply earlier in the cycle. Apply in June for the primary, and try and turn those secondaries around in 2 weeks. It's tough, but it can be done. And what I'd also suggest you do is once you get the primary in, between when you submit your primary and start receiving the secondaries, pre-write secondary essays for those programs you're confident you're going to get secondaries for. All right. Yes, occasionally the schools change a question, I realize, but I think the benefits far outweigh the risks. It's much easier to go from a draft that you can adapt to a new question or a new school than from a blank slate. So use that time. It can be a month, it can be 6 weeks between when you submit your primary and you start getting secondaries to pre-write secondaries, maybe for your in-state schools or for the schools you've applied to that send out secondaries automatically, or that post their secondary essay questions. It's very hard to be objective about something you've poured your heart and soul into, which is why I recommend a rejection review. But avoid the conclusion that you did everything right and that competition, a reality you have no control over whatsoever, was the sole cause of your rejection. For most of our clients, we find that a combination of 1 and 2, your competitiveness at specific schools or lack thereof, and flawed presentation of your qualifications contributed significantly to the rejection. The good news is that you can influence, if not control, these circumstances. And you can change all of that. Again, join that I can change movement. It takes time and effort. It's not easy, but it is possible. Now, at this point, I'd like to ask you in the chat window to share with me, if you would, what piece of advice, insight, or information in what was presented so far have you found most helpful for you as you start a reapplication effort? Pre-writing secondaries. Okay, great, Jackson. I'm glad that was helpful. Anybody else? Consider working with a tutor to improve MCAT scores. Wonderful. Great. Anybody else? I've spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of medical school applicants like you, striving to get into medical school and overwhelmed by the work involved. Many were perhaps rejected once, twice, even 3 times before they came to accept it. We here at Accepted understand how difficult and stressful this process can be, and we're here so that you can be helped to apply confidently and successfully to the best programs for you. You're at a crossroads now. You took the do-it-yourself approach last time, and frankly, it didn't work. Take a different route this time, a professional option for your professional future, your dream career. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected to work with us the second or third time around. They would have been better off working with us when they first got in touch with us, and so would you. One-on-one advising means that you will benefit from the know-how supplied by your expert sharing his or her expertise and experience with you as an individual. Given the complexity of the application process and the stakes and the fact that you really want this to be your last time applying to medical school, you need a guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. With Accepted, you can access professional expert advice, experience, and objectivity. You can save time, mitigate weaknesses, fix mistakes, apply with confidence, and apply successfully. We have the admissions experts, the guides, who can mentor you through the process so that you achieve your goal of applying confidently and successfully. Former admissions directors, staff members, post-bac program directors, and pre-health advising professionals who have been on the other side evaluating applicants and who can be your guide through the application process. Here's what you should do. Visit accepted.com/change-med-reject. Choose a service that's right for you because there are two options. Get the guidance you need to apply the high-level advice from today's webinar to your specific situation and go from confusion to clarity and from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may say, isn't Accepted expensive? Well, so is Rejection. Our fees are really clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious, even though it can be significantly higher. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with Accepted. Reapplication can easily cost you several $1,000s with application fees, potentially retaking the MCAT. Then there's another year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO degree, not to mention at the end of your career, because that's when you would get that extra year. And that can cost in tens of thousands of dollars. In a non-COVID year, you might have travel expenses to schools and interviews. And there's even the potential that you could have gotten into a better program with greater lifetime opportunities and perhaps even earnings. That's a little bit more nebulous, but it's out there. But enough from me. What do Accepted's clients say? Well, here's a little bit of a small sample of feedback. Okay, I'm going to read excerpts from this one. It's a little bit long. Within 2 weeks after my first interview, which happened to be at my top choice for attendance and an MD school no less, I got a phone call from the Dean of Admissions that I had been accepted. They even told me that I was a very competitive applicant and one of the first people accepted into their class. I was over the moon by this news, and Barry, who will be joining me shortly, was one of the first people I reached out to regarding this. I felt we had reached this accomplishment together as a cohesive team working toward a common goal. Here I am, an applicant who was initially told by others to give up, now labeled as one of the most competitive applicants they have had this year. I tell everyone to reach out to Accepted whenever they're ready to start the process. Accepted is far more reasonably priced than others, and the money is well worth it. You will not be disappointed in your investment. It is the best choice I have made in years. Sarah. Or this, here's a couple more. Hey, Sydney, I just found out that I was accepted to the University of Kentucky's medical school program. They said my interview really impressed them. Thank you so much for all your help and advice and preparation, because without you, I wouldn't have been able to be where I am today. Or this one, I got into UVM this morning, so thrilled about the news. Thank you so much for your support throughout this process. I'm still waiting to hear back from other schools, but this is such a relief. And this reapplicant was later accepted also to Tulane and LSU. And then this last one, working with Alicia has been an incredibly and indescribably wonderful experience and one of the best investments in my life. Thank you so much for making this possible through Accepted. Now this Joe, which is a pseudonym, was accepted in late December as a reapplicant. He followed Alicia's advice to both beef up his qualifications and improve his presentation. He worked hard, but he knew when he applied that particular cycle before New Year's that he was going to medical school, and he was thrilled. Now, we'd love to help you as we helped these clients, the ones who wrote the comments you just saw, and thousands of other clients over the last 27, actually it's going on 28 years. Imagine yourself for a second being in their shoes, just accepted to medical school. You may not have invested in yourself like this before, but isn't your future worth the investment? And remember, you can start with a rejection review, which can really change and improve your next application to medical school. So once again, here is what I recommend. Visit accepted.com/change-med-reject. Choose a service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need, and then apply confidently and effectively. And I mentioned again at the beginning, I'm mentioning again, you can get $75 off any rejection review purchased by February 22nd. That is next Tuesday, a week from today. The coupon code is 2x charm. And I'm also going to mention that we probably will have a price increase in March. So if you were to buy this now, you would get the $75 off and also get current pricing. $75 off of current pricing. So you'd avoid the price increase. And now I am joined by Dr. Barry Rothman, who is the former director of 3 post-bac programs at San Francisco State. He's been an accepted admissions consultant, I think, since 2014, 15, and his clients have had enormous success applying to post-bac, DO, and MD programs. And you know what else I'm going to do? Since I'm going to turn my video on so you can see my smiling face. And if you have any questions, please post them in the question window.
Linda, if you want to make me a host,
yes,
then
I'm
I
going
can
to
be
do that too.
Okay.
I'm going to do that right now. Thank you. Go. Yep.
Great.
Okay. All right. Hi, Barry. How you doing?
Hi.
Okay. All right. So, any questions? No questions? And I don't know, Barry, you have a question for the audience? You have something you want to add to what I said?
Yes. Stress is a big part of this whole process, and it's totally normal to feel stress around this. And so one important part of applying is learning how to manage stress. And one of the things I do with my clients is to review stress and stress handling techniques. It's not something we advertise, but it really does help. And I think you really do need to pay attention to that, because stress can have a very negative effect, or if you learn how to deal with it, it will have a positive effect, and it will prepare you for a career that inherently is stressful.
I also noticed in the chat window, Christina had asked, would you suggest maybe staggering applications if you're applying to 30+ schools? That way you won't be flooded with secondaries. What do you think about that strategy?
Well, you want to get your secondaries in a timely manner. The rule of thumb is to get them in within a couple of weeks. Staggering, yeah, but that means handing, I think what you mean, Christina, is that you would hand in some applications a little later than others.
What do you mean that she adds
you primary, add schools
yeah,
later,
you add schools through the MCAS portal, or
right?
the
I mean,
COMAS portal.
That's not a bad strategy. Just realize the later you add a school, the fewer seats are left. So you have to balance the number of seats left and the craziness that you're going to have to go through in handling 30 secondaries. One thing you can do, which is quite common, is to create a spreadsheet where you track everything, including the topics of your secondary questions, because many of them overlap. For example, in the last couple of years, almost every school asks a diversity question. So, you know, once you write a couple of diversity essays, you can borrow from them and apply them to other schools. But don't just blindly copy and paste.
Right.
Tailor it to that school and the writing prompt. But still, you can save a lot of time and energy by using previous essays that you've written. Now, but you need to keep track of them. And after 30 secondaries, it's hard to remember what you wrote to what school. So it's good to have a spreadsheet where you track all the different topics and the due dates, et cetera, so that you stay totally organized.
Sounds good. Any other questions from the audience? Not? I have a question for you folks. I have a story and I have a final thought, but if you have, so everybody knows how to reapply now? Yeah, raise your hand if you know how to reapply now. One hand went up, 3 hands went up. Okay, oh, now we're talking. Okay, okay. So most of you now know how to, that's fantastic. Okay, that served my purpose. That was the purpose of the webinar, that you should all know how to reapply. I'm glad that you do. And
Tanisha raised her hand, I believe.
I think that was in response to my question, is does she now know how to reapply? If you have a question, again, we're here for you. We're happy to answer any questions that you have on reapplication, on your situation, on the rejection review, accepted services.
Well, one thing I can do, Linda, is just reiterate some of the main thoughts in terms of reapplying. In reapplying, most schools will ask in their secondaries, are you a reapplicant? And in answering that, you need to say why you didn't get in the first time. Really be clear on that, and don't just kind of wave your hands and not say, because they know why you didn't get in. So you might as well be honest and straightforward, and then say what you've done to address each of those points. And that can be a very organized answer. That impresses schools, and schools are used to having reapplicants. And there's no shame in being a reapplicant.
I think about half the people are at reapplicants, aren't they?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, because it's such a challenging process, and many people don't know how to do it as efficiently as possible.
Right. And if you think about the webinar I presented, I very much did go through, say, this was the cause, this is what you can do to address it. All right. At this point, I want to thank Dr. Rothman for joining me again. And I want to thank you folks for your time, your answers, your participation. And I want to wish you good luck with your application. But before you leave, I have a final thought and story and a question.
Linda, Zach has a question in the
great.
chat.
Okay. So Zach asks, is approximately 20 credits of a 4.0 GPA of high-level science while working full-time over a full year sufficient to demonstrate grade repair? Would you mind sharing, Zach, what your, at least a grade range for what you're trying to repair? A little context might help us here. I assume you agree, Barry?
Yeah. So what was the GPA, the science, the BCPM GPA before the repair work?
Zach dropped off? No. Oh, did he? Oh, all right.
Okay.
In that case, sorry about that. But for anybody else here, if you're worried about
yeah, I looked at the participant list and Zach.
Yeah, he's dropped off. Okay. So I'm going to send you, I won't help him any, but if anybody else is worried about mitigating a low GPA, I did a whole podcast on that. Now you won't be able to do that entirely in your primary application because it doesn't give it a lot of room for it, but that will help you. All right, final thought, story, and a question from me to you. When our eldest son was a baby, my husband and I went to an event where we met a former teacher of ours. He took one look at the chubby sleeping baby in his stroller and said, "This is an experiment that must be repeated." Now, applying to medical school and getting rejected is the exact opposite. It is an experiment you don't want to repeat. And what you really want is different results. You need to evaluate what went wrong and change your application strategy and execution in order to have those different results. And now the story about a client who had very different results. Terry, not her real name, hired accepted to work with her. She had previously applied to medical school and received one interview invitation, no acceptances. She had a below average MCAT and GPA for most allopathic medical schools. Second time around, she worked with accepted consultant, Dr. Barry Rothman, who joined me today, who evaluated her application and helped her improve it. The results?
Sorry, I
okay, no problem.
hit the
no
wrong
problem.
button.
No problem. Okay, I guess you're dangerous when I share the hosting with you. All right, second time around, she worked with accepted consultant Dr. Barry Rothman, who's dangerous in a Zoom room, who evaluated her application and helped her improve it. The results: she was invited to 5 interviews and accepted to 2 MD programs. Terry did as so many others have done over the last 20, no, what did I say? Yeah, it's getting up there, almost 28 years. She accessed the objectivity, expertise, and experience that an accepted consultant provides. She's in medical school now. She put on her white coat. She's going to be an MD. Imagine yourself just a few years behind her, starting medical school in the summer of 2023 and proudly attending your own white coat ceremony shortly thereafter. She followed the steps on the screen. She got accepted to medical school, and so can you. You just need to get accepted. Now, my question. I'm wondering if you folks can help me understand something. You attended the webinar, the pitch, the Q&A, and the close. You're clearly interested in what we have to say, which I appreciate enormously. I really do appreciate your time here. If you are currently not working with Accepted or planning to do so, could you share with us what's causing you to hesitate about engaging individually with an accepted consultant like Dr. Barry Rothman? And you can choose the chat window or the question window, whatever you want. If nobody responds, I look forward to working with all of you. Again, if you check out accept.com/change-med-reject, you will get details about our services. You'll also see that if you are interested in services, we do offer free consultations, so you can kind of try us out. The free consultation is with a consultant. It's not with a salesperson. Check it out. In the meantime, best wishes for your success with your reapplication. Good luck to all of you. Thank you very much. Take care.